NATO considers its next move. A close ally of President Zelensky has accused Western countries of cowardice for not giving more military support to the Ukrainian army. As Russian troops are repositioning in the east to launch a new attack, there's growing frustration among some Ukrainians over the stance of some of its allies. Our World Affairs editor John Simpson reports from Lviv.
At an Orthodox church in Lviv, there's a double funeral. Both soldiers were in their 40s. Both died fighting with the Ukrainian forces in the east of the country. NATO estimates that Ukraine's losses are something like a third of Russia's. In this bitter war, the Ukrainians have two advantages: a ferocious determination to drive the Russians out and the weaponry that they're getting from NATO. But the Ukrainian government wants more weapons, urgently. Maksym Kozystsky is the governor of Lviv and a close ally of President Zelensky.
What does Ukraine need most? Is it medical supplies, is it clothes, is it food, or is it weapons?
Ви знаєте, звичайно, що основна допомога, яку ми потребуємо, це потреба в сучасному озброєнні.
What we need the most is modern weapons, anti-ship systems, anti-aircraft systems, systems with which we can fight against tanks and aircraft, as well as heavy weapons, because we have to stop the enemy. But our goal is not to stop the enemy, it's to oust him from Ukrainian land.
Like his president, Kozystsky believes NATO isn't giving Ukraine nearly enough weapons. He's pretty scathing.
In my opinion, from the West, there's a policy of double standards and cowardice. It's cowardice not to call a spade, and cowardice not to take any position. And cowardice leads to tragedies.
Ukraine is starting to get tanks from NATO, elderly Soviet-made ones from the Czech Republic. But what Ukraine really wants is more heavy guns and more missile systems. NATO insists it's supplying them as fast as possible, but it's not as much or as quickly as Ukraine says it needs. John Simpson, BBC News, Lviv.
Let's go live to Lviv now in western Ukraine and talk to the BBC's Emma Vardy. Emma, just what does Ukraine and Western intelligence believe is going to be happening in the east of Ukraine, a region that's already been at war for 8 years, and how soon?
Well, Russian forces have suffered losses. They're going to take a bit of time to regroup and refocus their efforts to the east. But we're already seeing now the movement of Russian troops and supplies towards the Donbass region. It's understood that the goal of Russian troops is to encircle the Ukrainian forces who are there and to take much bigger parts of the territory in east of Ukraine, in the Donbass region, where some of it is already held by Russian-backed separatists. Now, as to how soon, well, Ukrainian forces say they're getting ready, they're braced for attacks to be stepped up there. There's already, of course, missile strikes continuing on towns in the east, particularly the southern key port city of Mariupol, where intense bombardment continues. But people are very aware now that this is where Russia's aggression is going to be focused. And that's why we're seeing these increased warnings now from Ukrainian officials telling people in these regions, get out while you still can, find a way to escape, because this intense period, they believe, is coming. And of course, people have now seen in recent days the horrors that have been left behind in the areas around Kyiv, where Russian forces have withdrawn, the apparent brutality that has taken place there, the alleged war crimes that the Ukrainian president continues to tell world leaders about, and people are afraid. So we are seeing now the movement of thousands of people getting out of the regions of eastern Ukraine, where it's believed the Kremlin wants to focus its efforts. Now, if Russia was to be able to take the whole Donbass region, it would characterise this as liberating this part of Ukraine. It would portray this as a win inside Russia. But it's nowhere near doing that yet. And there's every indication this could lead to a prolonged ground war to be able to take that size of territory.
Emma, you mentioned Mariupol in the south. How many people out of, 160,000 people living in truly dreadful conditions there, how many have been able to leave so far?
We believe about 1,000 got out yesterday, led in a convoy by the Red Cross, and that was a small success really after days and days of attempts to evacuate people. Others have been able to get out under their own steam in private cars. There are humanitarian corridors opened up, but of course it's going to take a much bigger effort to evacuate the many, many more people who are still trapped there. And we understand the conditions are just worse and worse by the day because of course there's not many places left to shelter. A lot of the city, we understand, is reduced to rubble, people trying to shelter in basements, in ruined buildings, without a lot of food, without electricity and fresh water. And the mayor of Mariupol has been speaking on behalf of people, trying to say how badly the humanitarian crisis is getting. He said, look, we're seeing 100 missile strikes within one day alone. So it is incredibly dangerous to try to get people out of there. Goodness only knows how bad the situation looks from the inside. We may know more in the days to come. And the Red Cross says it's continuing its efforts to try to evacuate people. But it's very difficult for the aid workers too. We had a Red Cross team who were held by police a couple of days ago. That stalled one of the efforts to get in there. Other times they've had to pause evacuation efforts because they're not quite sure of the high-level security guarantees that are quite in place to ensure the safe passage of people to get out. So it is still an absolutely desperate situation there. And there are other towns and cities also under Russian occupation. Ukrainian officials have been pointing to some of those horrific pictures coming out of Bucha and saying to people, we believe this is only the tip of the iceberg. The world is yet to see what has gone on in other areas that are still occupied by Russian forces.
Emma, thanks very much. Emma Vardy there in Lviv in western Ukraine.